He is a four-time Olympian, now turned into a politician. He's the current MP of Milton. He's someone we admire very much. We have Adam and Koeverden joining us today.
You know, the most expensive place you can sleep in Toronto is not at the Ritz-Carlton. It's actually in jail or in the hospital.
Regarding these growing censorship in the West, they don't really like it.
Objectively, there is a lot of misconception about what censorship is and what censorship isn't.
But to push back on that a little bit, there's a lot of people in Canada who feel like they can't say certain things.
It's one of the biggest mistakes, and it's actually one of the reasons why we're in a housing crisis.
Yeah.
But if you ignore harm reduction, then people will continue to die.
Would you ever want to be Canada's Prime Minister? Hello and welcome everybody to the Ready Set West podcast. We are incredibly excited to be bringing this new endeavor towards you guys. We want to bring on community leaders of all kinds. We're talking politicians, we're talking CEOs, we're talking religious leaders. Anybody who cares about the community and has something to say about the youth, we want to talk to them. We want to hold conversations. Today we are graced with the presence of someone that we've been wanting to talk to for a long time. He is a four-time Olympian, now turned into a politician. He's the current MP of Milton. He's someone we admire very much. We have Adam and Koeverden joining us today. You've won a gold. That's the most important thing. We
That was
just
a long
have to
time
mention
ago.
that. A long time ago. So Adam won a gold when we were born in 2004 in Athens, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're very excited to be having him on. We have a few different questions planned. Just things about the youth. That's our goal. At the end of the day, we're youth ourselves. We just want to talk about things that benefit the youth and benefit us, right? So we want to ask you the right questions, and then hopefully people can benefit from that.
Great. That's my goal too, to hold space and conversations for people so that their voices are heard and everybody feels like they're a part of democracy. So this is a great endeavor.
100%. So you want to start off with the first question?
Yeah, of course. So Adam, tell us a little about your upbringing. What are some of the experiences you've had as a teenager? Any challenges you've had as a teenager, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, sure. Well, being a young person is hard. And my kind of observation is that it's never been harder.
Right.
You know, these little glowing, greasy glass rectangles that we carry around in our pockets sort of control everything that we see. They have a tremendous impact on our emotions and our anxiety levels. We didn't have those when I was a kid. So that's a big difference. But
How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 42 in January,
42,
so about 20 years older than you guys. 22 actually, because when you were born, I won the Olympics. Thanks for making me feel ancient. But I'm celebrating the 20-year anniversary for that Olympic gold next summer, which is like bonkers to think that it was
Yeah, we
2
see some of the
decades ago.
films here.
It's from 2008.
2008?
And like, anyway, I don't want to look at the way my arms used to look. Now they're
Kayakers
different.
in
So,
their upper
yeah.
bodies. It's insane.
But anyway, to answer your question, I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, North Oakville, at Chautauqua Co-op. It's community housing. It's something that Canada stopped building 30 years ago, and it was one of the biggest mistakes, and it's actually one of the reasons why we're in a housing crisis. So community housing is basically like not-for-profit, rent geared to income, supportive housing that is designed for people who work regular jobs, for families that might never own a home. And, you know, in every country around the world, that's totally normal.
Yeah.
But in Canada, you know, similar to the United States, the dream of home ownership is something that has really influenced a lot of governments. And governments have gotten away from saying, yeah, we're going to build like long-term rentals. We're going to build supportive housing. We're going to build subsidized housing. So we're going to say that it's okay to have a $16 minimum wage. Then you also have to say that it's important that government build housing that people can afford to live in with families, right?
100%.
And so one of the reasons I got involved in politics is to see more communities like the Chautauqua Co-op built. Because it actually requires intention. Yeah. It's not like a mushroom or a weed that will grow in your backyard without you even realizing it. It's something that requires intention and leadership. So I'm very grateful for the leadership of our government. We've got $1.5 billion already allocated to new co-op housing builds, but that's just part of a $70 billion Canada housing strategy, which is trying to combat the housing crisis. And I would say that if that wasn't started 6-7 years ago, the crisis that we find ourselves in housing would be a lot worse today. People will say it's bad and it's Trudeau's fault. You know, what I say to them is we don't know what a parallel universe looks like. We don't know how bad it would be if we weren't, at the same time focusing on building housing. So I'm very, very grateful for the leadership of Justin Trudeau and our team in creating the first ever national housing strategy.
And just to clarify, so when you say co-op housing, like, what is the system regarding, like, is it like free housing or is it like a minimal fee that families pay?
No, it's certainly not free. It's different for every community, it's different for every family, and it's about meeting people where they are. and helping them through the process of whether it's getting better, just supporting a family in their current situation. Sometimes there's a divorce, sometimes there's a disability, sometimes there's other challenges, and more those vulnerable families and people find themselves in the system. Right. And in the system is the most expensive way to help somebody. The most expensive place you can sleep in Toronto is not at the Ritz-Carlton, it's actually in jail or in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And that's a societal, cost. Right. When we don't take care of people and they turn to crime, or their mental health suffers, or they fall into the trap of addictions, then society and the social safety net is there in Canada, something that we can be grateful for, but we also want more preventative measures and systems that support people. So co-op housing is a lot of things to a lot of people. There's equity co-ops, there's non-equity co-ops, there's subsidized, there's old provincial co-ops, there's federal ones, there's municipal co-ops. Co-op housing is just basically nobody's making money, okay? But in every other system of market housing, people make money.
Investors are making a lot of money. Contractors are making a lot of money in these kinds of things.
Yeah, and I should say that contractors that build a co-op would make money because they're doing good work and they're important work. But if we're going to build good co-ops, then we should also use contractors that are unionized, that their labor is fair, that there's a competitive environment for them to work, that they have rights. Anyways, don't get me started on housing or labor or collective bargaining, because we'll be here all day. And your question was about my upbringing. So my parents got divorced when I was very young. I was very fortunate to grow up with two very supportive parents, but it was two families in the sense. So my brother and I went back and forth between my mom's house and my dad's house, and that changed things for us. And I'd say that in the mid '80s, particularly in the Catholic upbringing that I was brought up in, divorce was stigmatized. So the Catholic school system put both of us into counseling to talk about our feelings and everything. And I always felt like maybe we were going through more than we were because of that Catholic environment. Divorce is sadly more common now than it probably was back then, but I also think that it's less stigmatized as well because it's kind of normal. But I grew up at the co-op. The reason that I had access to things like guitar lessons and basketball and camp was because my mom could afford it, because we lived in a community that took care of us. There was after school care, there was sports, and then when I started getting a little bit more interested in athletics, I went down to the canoe club, and the reason that my mom could afford the canoe club was because we had a supportive housing situation at the co-op. I would hate to think that in an alternate universe, my mom would have had to say no to sports because it was too expensive, and I know that that's a reality for a lot of parents today. So I went down to the canoe club when I was 13 years old, mostly because my mom wanted to keep me out of trouble after school, and it worked. I got hooked, and I loved being on the water with my friends. I loved all the travel, and it made me realize that I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. I loved joining teams. I loved training in groups. I loved being a leader, and all of the experiences, university, all the work with non-government organizations and charities that I got to do. My first experiences in politics that were all as a result of my time spent in a kayak.
Yeah. So we want to talk about that a little bit. We were going to ask you about affordability, but I think we've touched enough about that now. It's something that a lot of youth worry about, right? Will we be able to afford homes? We're striving for amazing careers. We're trying to do our best and be a contributing citizen. But will that lead to home ownership one day and that kind of thing? It's a big worry for a lot of youth. So you're saying that it's more important to think collectively, make sure that people have homes to begin with, from a community lens, help them out, and ensure that they stay out of addictions and whatnot. But addictions are something that a lot of people are facing right now. It's increasing with social media. I think it's never been able to access a lot of harmful stuff that are around. What do you think about that? Are people accessing these things too easily? Should there be more constraints in place? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, addiction is a huge issue, and it's also a diverse kind of ecosystem. I think we all have our own addictions. I would be lying if I said I wasn't addicted to my phone. I pick it up without thinking about it. I look at it compulsively. And I think we're all guilty of letting half an hour, 45 minutes, 60 minutes go by as we scroll. And it's mindless. It's not even entertaining. It's just sort of this trap that we've fallen into. And I would love to think that we can be as mindful as we would like to be and sort of escape that trap. But I think you're talking about drug use. Drug use is not new. I think the new presenting factor in drug use in Canada and around the world is the poison drug supply. And that's primarily fentanyl. And the reason that we're seeing increased deaths from addictions and mental health and drug use is because of a poison drug supply. Right. Now, people will say that if people aren't using drugs, then they wouldn't be exposed to a poison drug supply. That's very true. And there are 4 pillars of dealing with an addictions situation in the world. These are incontrovertible, okay? Like, this is not something that's debatable, and it's a thing that we have in the House of Commons with the Conservatives.
So let's go over those 4.
Sure.
Because I think that'll be beneficial for a lot of you.
I'm not actually an expert, but I'm going to do my best to remember them.
Okay.
Prevention is number 1. The second pillar, again, like I'm freelancing here, I didn't bring my notes, but is proper care.
Okay.
We also have to focus on the sort of legal aspect, and that's important as well, which is, I don't know exactly what the word is, but there's sort of an enforcement aspect to it. Safe supply is also a critical pillar. Right. Because if people can only access something that they're strongly addicted to in an unsafe environment, then they'll continue to be vulnerable, and disproportionately will see death. Yeah. And we have, particularly in environments where people are forced onto the street in order to access what has become a medicine for them to deal with other things. So taking a discompassionate lens and applying that to the opioid crisis is not going to solve the opioid crisis. It's going to further stigmatize addiction, and what it's going to do is lead to more harm and more death. So it's called harm reduction. Yeah. Okay, I called it safe supply. So if I can go through those again, prevention, harm reduction, enforcement, and recovery.
Exactly. Now, out of these 4, what would you say Canada is doing the best job at, and what are we lacking in? What do we need to focus on?
That's a good question. I think we're doing a good job on all 4, and unfortunately, I see a lot of pushback, primarily from the Conservative Party, on harm reduction, because they, unfortunately, would like to focus on enforcement. Yeah. They would like to focus on just prevention, treatment, and enforcement. Those are really important. Yeah. But if you ignore harm reduction, then people will continue to die. Mm-hmm. So it's taking a pragmatist approach. It's coming at this from the perspective of knowing that addiction is extremely hard. It's not as simple as saying just quit. Yeah. If just quit was that easy, then we wouldn't have people using tobacco or alcohol, and certainly a drug like opioids are even more physically addictive than those drugs. So. In my context right now, I was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Health, so it was something that I was a little bit focused on. There was also a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Addictions and Mental Health, so it was sort of like a subset. But now I'm working as the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of the Environment, Climate Change, Sport, and Physical Activity, 2 different ministers. Right. So I've been doing less work on addictions and mental health than last year.
Yeah. Well, I think this is something really important, and a lot of youth are facing this right now. It's something that's prevalent from a very young age. Mm-hmm. I would say it's even creeped into middle schools. It's that bad, right? Mm-hmm. It's obviously always been a problem in high schools and universities, but it's something that has reached the middle schools. And I think we can benefit the youth by talking a little bit about our personal experiences regarding it. And I remember facing these sort of problems, especially playing a lot of sports. It tends to be around the athletes. That a lot of them are abusing these kinds of things. And I remember I would not even touch this sort of thing. I remember one time in the locker room I had a situation where a friend got up, a teammate, and he said, "Could you pass me the thing he left behind?" And it was something that I wasn't comfortable passing with. It was that sort of substance. So I told him, "Look, get it yourself. I'm not even gonna put my hands on something like this," because I had a firm belief that I wouldn't even come close to something like this. I know you share the same mindset, and especially being an Olympic kayaker, having influence, I'm sure you were around, enjoyed your youth. But how'd you stay away from these sort of things?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between sort of performance enhancing, recreational, and then like therapeutic drugs. Yeah. And they're in different categories, right? I would put marijuana and alcohol in that sort of recreational context.
Yeah.
Calling them recreational, might frustrate people because a lot of people believe in abstinence, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But the reason that somebody reaches for marijuana or alcohol is mostly for that like recreational mood altering experience. It's not for the other two reasons that I stated, which are performance enhancing, which is the reason that somebody might reach. I'm not making assumptions about your experience, but a lot of young athletes feel like if they want to be really good at their sports, then they need to try these performance enhancing drugs. Let me tell you, that's absolutely false. I never touched a performance enhancing performance enhancing substance in my 20-year athletic career, unless you consider a Coca-Cola or a coffee with some caffeine in it performance enhancing.
Caffeine is a big one, but it's normalized completely.
Yeah, it is totally. But it's normal. Also, I had a big coffee this morning, and it's like a normal part of my day. But it's also a drug, and so is nicotine. But then the therapeutic drugs, people get hooked on because they are taking pain medication or they get hurt at their work, and then they can't get off of it because it's highly addictive. That's stuff like oxy and opioids that then once they're not able to get what they need from their doctor or from the drugstore, they start using street drugs, which are extremely dangerous and lead to thousands of deaths a year. These are 3 different categories, and I think combating the addictions in those 3 contexts are different.
Yeah, 100%.
He won a gold without using these substances.
4-time Olympian, ladies and gentlemen.
That should be enough proof that you don't need them to perform.
Look, 99.9% of Olympic golds are won without performance-enhancing drugs. Yeah. It's a concept that gets more airtime than I would like, because the vast majority of athletes that go to the Olympics are doing it with integrity, with no drugs, and
it hinders their accomplishment, right? If someone spreads that sort of rumor, it makes them double check themselves, and for no reason when they don't deserve it, right? It's a valuable accomplishment that they did naturally. But in terms of recreational drugs as well, a lot of people consider abstinence a solution. Certain people want to take it and whatnot. The message we want to enforce is, how are you going to be the best performer? How are you going to do what you will one day sit on your deathbed and hopefully be proud of in this world, right? So do you think recreational drugs are something you would, tell youth to stay away from, or would you say it's okay once in a while? What's your stance on it?
Well, certainly youth, I'm going to suggest that young people stay away from drugs and alcohol. There's an age, for those types of things, and I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say, never drink a beer, because I drink a beer every once in a while. And there's a lot of reasons why somebody may choose to or may choose not to, whether those are personal reasons or religious ones or whatever. And that's personal. But I think we have to recognize that those substances all have an impact on us socially and from a health perspective. I believe in moderation. It's okay to, enjoy a beer or two, but if it's 20 or 30 a week and you're drinking every single day, then that's when somebody needs to find some support and help. And thankfully, here in Halton, there's a lot of those services available. But we want to prevent our friends from falling into those traps. I'm not going to advocate for recreational drug or alcohol use, but I'm also not going to be a hypocrite and suggest that I don't enjoy an occasional beer. But for young people, particularly those under 18, I'm going to insist that we work on ways to be healthy in society and socially present without having to lean on any of those substances for 100%. That social lubrication, as we call it. Kids feel a lot of pressure to try that stuff, and I hope kids don't feel like that social pressure to try things they don't want to try.
There's always room to do certain things that you can have fun at times, but we have to admit, it's not constructive. Right, these sort of things aren't bettering your productivity. They aren't helping you in your career. They aren't helping you in your studies and these kinds of things. So generally, it's better to stay away. But that kind of scenario, right? Would you agree with that? I think we'll move away from it. I think we've talked a lot about kind of these substances. It's really important for the youth. I know a lot of people needed to hear that.
Speaking of the youth people, the next question is, we did talk about phone addictions and how the youth are addicted to social media. Now, some feedback from the youth regarding these growing censorship in the West, they don't really like it. They think that people should have access to absolutely everything, and that there should be no censorship, and that all information on the internet should not be filtered. What do you think about that?
This came up in a recent conversation with youth, and I'll be honest, I it's not a suspicion. I'll say objectively, there is a lot of misconception about what censorship is and what censorship isn't, and how prevalent censorship is in our society. And I garnered this insight just yesterday in a group. There's 23 11th and 12th graders here in my office, and we talked about this. And there seems to be some misinformation out there that there's this bill C-18, which has led to censorship online. It's not actually that simple. What Bill C-18 aims to do is compensate creators, primarily journalists and writers, for their work, because the biggest companies in the world, there's an acronym for them, GAFAM. They're the tech giants, so Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. You know who the rest of them are. You know, TikTok, Facebook and Meta, I should say, because Instagram's certainly in there. So these companies are financially benefiting from what people are creating in terms of news and content constantly. When we share that stuff on social media, there's an algorithm and they make money. They also don't pay taxes, so they don't contribute to society almost at all. And they're not paying for what they're using. So imagine you had a small basement apartment in your family home, and some like large conglomerate said, no, we don't own that basement apartment, but we want to use it, so people are going to sleep down there and we're not going to compensate you. Like, it's exactly the same. Somebody coming for your stuff, using it, and not paying you. It's not cool, and it needs to change. So Canadian media, Canadian journalists, Canadian musicians, artists of all types of content creators all came together, and they asked the federal government to create a law that was similar to the one in Australia that was passed, that demands that these massive companies, the largest, most influential, most powerful companies in the world, Google, Apple, Facebook, Instagram, Amazon, and Microsoft, compensate people. And there needs to be a legal framework for that compensation. If you're going to share my news article that I spent weeks writing, then you ought to compensate that writer for it. Meta came out of the gates like last spring and said, we're not participating in this economy. We're not compensating anybody, even though they already had in Australia, and they set up an agreement with the media organizations in Australia to compensate them. They said, we're not doing that in Canada, probably because they're upset that they're losing money. So we're just blocking media entirely
in Canada
from Instagram and Facebook. So now you can't post a CBC article or a National Post article or Globe and Mail article on your Facebook.
Right. So that misconception, I think from the youth's perspective, we think the government did this. A lot of people are thinking that the government's doing this. They're saying that it was Meta who did it.
100%.
And it was the company's decision, not the government's.
Yeah, if the government did it, then it wouldn't be available on Twitter or on Google or on TikTok. And it continues to be. And it's because Meta has taken the preemptive step of removing media from their platform. Because, to be clear, the law is not even in place yet. There's a process through legislation. The bill has passed, but it's not yet enforced, and there's no actual law, and there's still regulations to be ironed out. But in a preemptive manner, Facebook and Instagram have taken away news. So, you used to be able to add a link or share something from any news organization, from BBC, the Globe and Mail, Al Jazeera, whatever. You can't right now in Canada, and you might see, you share it and it says not available in Canada, and that's not because of the law. That's because of Instagram's and Facebook's interpretation of that law and their unwillingness to pay people for their work. So there's no censorship from the government, first of all, and also folks need to know the difference between the CRTC and the government. Okay, because a lot of conservatives who are they claim to be free speech warriors, will say that this is a form of government censorship. We've always had the CRTC in Canada, just like a lot of other institutions that I have a lot of respect for, like the CMHC and the CBC. These are like agencies of the government. They're organizations that the government provides resources to, but they're not controlled by the government, right? And it's good. We have good institutions in Canada. We're a safe, vibrant place with standards, right? We're a country of laws and a country of standards that have managed to keep Canadian society very, very safe. And I'll also say we've benefited from it financially too. We have a very vibrant journalism sector. People are employed in Canadian media. That's not to suggest that you're going to agree with everything that you read. And to be clear, you shouldn't. It's a part of growing up and learning that We need to have the critical reasoning skills to read something, identify whether it's fact or opinion, come to our own opinions. But some people that I've talked to, they're frustrated that they read things and that's biased.
Right.
Of course it's biased. We're all biased.
Of course,
and that's
everyone
okay.
has their own implicit biases. Right? Yeah. But to push back on that a little bit, there's a lot of people in Canada who feel like they can't say certain things because there's the idea of cancel culture. So the freedom of expression has come into play a lot. People talk about the woke agenda and these kinds of things, how they aren't able to touch on certain subjects, and they feel that the government is suppressing their voice in that regard. What do you say about that? Are people able to express whatever opinion? What's the line between expressing an opinion and it being hate crime? What's kind of the median line? Because a lot of youth, they don't know if they can say certain things. How do we decide? Where's the line?
That's true. So people, I think, will bring up like what hate speech is and what's my freedom of expression quite often, and act as though there's some government agenda to suppress people's opinions or voices. I just haven't seen anybody be suppressed or, been told by any level of government that they're not allowed to say certain things. But that stops at hate speech.
Yeah.
That stops when things incite violence. They spread misinformation and they become harmful to society.
Right.
And I think we can all think of examples, whether they be Islamophobic, homophobic, anti-Semitic, deeply racist, sexist, bigoted. We have to ensure that we're building a society that doesn't allow for and create an environment where that's okay.
Yeah.
Language is painful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hurtful, and it can be. So I would question anybody, and I've received emails from people claiming that their right to free expression includes hate speech.
Yeah.
And they very clearly say, like, I should be able to say exactly how I feel. That's a lot like saying if I want to slap somebody in the face, then I should be able to slap somebody in the face because that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But when your actions or my actions become deeply hurtful to an individual, or worse, to a group of people, and it puts their lives or their livelihoods or their freedoms in peril, that is considered hate speech. And it's those individuals, particularly vulnerable communities, are protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Right.
And I'm not selective about whose rights I will stand up for.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously hate expression, all this kind of stuff, hate speech has to be completely condemned. People can't be saying just whatever, especially if it incites violence and these kinds of things. But let's look into why people are feeling like this. A lot of people feel that these different phobias, a few that you mentioned, let's say all of them are important. All of them need to be stood up for. A lot of people feel that their tax dollars are going towards propaganda to make people feel that this be more accepting of this. But a lot of people feel that that propaganda isn't needed. The government doesn't need to spend money to do certain actions, hold certain types of events for these people to feel more welcome. Rather, they can help that community in different ways using that tax dollar in a better, more efficient way. And because of that, because people feel that their pocket is being drained because of these things, they actually feel the need to incite more violence. Do you think that it's a common problem that we're facing?
Yeah, and I've seen it. And I'll be very explicit. I think what you're talking about is pride events and standing up for the 2S LGBTQ plus community in Canada. Yeah. Because this past summer, Milton hosted a pride parade, and then soon after, we started seeing events that were in stark contrast of that opinion.
Yeah, and no one wants that.
Well, no. And I think, the Conservatives have gone to great lengths to suggest that that Justin Trudeau has some sort of woke agenda, and Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has received considerable backlash from groups who exist only to protect people from hate. Right. With respect to what Pierre Poilievre chose as his language recently, which was referring to Justin Trudeau's radical gender propaganda or radical gender agenda, which is a far-right trope that is damaging to people and is hurtful to people because, look, homosexuals exist in our society. Yeah. Trans people exist in our society, and they deserve the same rights, freedoms, and protections as everybody else. Right. And unfortunately, in 2023, we're still not at a point where people are equal or safe. Yeah. And the same is true of Muslims in many societies. Yeah. I mean, yesterday, we just saw the guilty verdict for a terrorist, a white supremacist murder in London, Ontario. Yeah. And it's clear that some groups still require protection.
You can conclude that a little bit by just saying, look, it's very easy to criticize, and a lot of people are very critical of the government. But I think the message we're kind of getting to is, look, if you want to make an impact, get involved, right? That kind of thing. If you feel that the current steps being taken aren't enough or they are too much, get involved, share your voice. And then as a collective, we come up with the best solutions, right? All minds are better than one, kind of thing.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap it up here.
Yeah, let's start with some, we'll do some quick rapid questions, because I know we've touched on a lot of serious topics. We want to get
some
to know
lighthearted questions, So I can start first.
Okay, let's do it.
Ottawa or Milton?
Milton.
100%? Yeah, he didn't hesitate.
Ottawa is pretty boring. All right. Best Olympics you participated in?
Good question. Athens was great because it was my most successful games. I won 2 medals, including a gold. London was also really cool because they had a lot of volunteers. Beijing was the biggest. Rio was the craziest party. So, I mean, everybody might have their favorite, but I've got 4 favorites.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And who's the best canoeer in your opinion, other than you?
Well, I paddled a kayak. So a kayak is actually a form of a canoe. All of those boats were invented by indigenous people, and I think it's really, important to recognize that the heritage and the history of canoeing and kayaking is deeply, deeply steeped and tied to indigenous culture, whether that's First Nations with respect to the canoe, or the Inuit and other northern communities like the Greenlandic and Greenlandic and Aleutian peoples with respect to the kayak. And I don't have to choose just one. There's lots of great kayakers and canoers. I'll choose the first ever Olympic champion in the sport of canoeing, Canadian named Frank Amiot from Ottawa, Ontario.
All right, we've got 2 more questions. Would you ever want to be Canada's Prime Minister? Is that a goal in mind?
It's not a goal, to be honest. I really enjoy being a member of Parliament, and I enjoy representing people. I enjoy having an opportunity to sit with people like you and have these types of conversations. I also enjoy having days off, and I think everybody enjoys having a couple days off every week, and that would not be possible if I was the Prime Minister. They do not get days off. It's a very hard job, trying to keep everybody happy and hear everybody's voice and communicate for everyone. 40 million people strong in Canada, the most diverse country in the world. It's really, really hard to lead such a diverse group of voices, let alone, here in Milton, there's 152,000 voices, and I find it difficult to establish a consensus with my neighbors and making sure that that the message that I bring to Ottawa isn't offensive to some people.
Yeah.
Because we've established that, right?
Yeah.
Like we have a great community here in Milton, and we have people with opposing views, and that is something that I try to ensure that we respect and we're actually grateful for.
Yeah.
We don't want to live in a homogenous society where we all agree all the time, but it's how we disagree that's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how we disagree is critical. We should never disagree in a way that devalues somebody else. We ought not to disagree in a way that builds walls up around us, and we ought not to disagree in a manner that offends others deeply. It's okay to to challenge somebody's biases, and it's okay to have a different opinion, but it's never okay to tell somebody else that the way they live or what they believe is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's something that we're kind of going through and grappling with a little bit right now in society.
Yeah.
Right. And then the last question.
Yeah.
This is going to be an interesting one. What is your
I'm
favorite?
actually really interested in this one. I want to know what he says.
What is your favorite country beside Canada? Second favorite country.
Just a quick answer. No justification, no nothing. Right? I know we're out of
First
time.
country that pops in mind.
I can't think of one
I
off the
think
top
it's
of
the
my head.
Netherlands.
The Netherlands?
Yeah.
No, I haven't spent enough time in the Netherlands to know.
Really? Because you're half Dutch, right?
I'm half Dutch. My dad's Dutch. My mom's Hungarian. I've spent way more time in Hungary than I have in pretty much any other. So Norway. I'll tell you why. Norway is so unbelievably aggressive and progressive on fighting climate change, and they're also an oil-producing nation like Canada.
Okay.
And they're doing it in a way where they're establishing resiliency, innovation. They just really all seem as though they're pushing in the same direction.
Right.
Even
So you think they've hit the right balance there?
Well, they're definitely less balanced than Canada. Canada's really grappling with the notion that our economy is heavily leveraged by oil and gas. Well, so is Norway's economy, and yet like 70% of Norwegians drive an electric car.
Right.
And their infrastructure is set up so that everybody can. And there's like a lot of low-hanging fruit in Canada that we're not even addressing right now. There's like hundreds of people in Milton that still have to use home heating oil to heat their homes, which is an extremely emissions-intensive way to heat one's home. Yeah. We have alternatives in Canada. Things are challenging to change, you know. I think one of the reasons why Canada is almost like a little bit resilient or resistant to change is because we experience so much change like throughout the year, you know, naturally.
Yeah.
And,
the 4 seasons.
As
we're
it's
grateful,
getting
but we're
freezing
not.
outside. Yeah.
Well, we have a gift for you, Adam. Thank you so much for being our very first host. This is something that I should have given to you 3 years ago, nearly 2.5 years ago. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. You weren't able to come to the first game. And then after that, I know we saw each other, but I never had it on me. So I wasn't able to give it to you. But we have your Sporting Milton jersey. That's
waiting in the closet. Look at that. That's a good shirt.
Signed, sealed, and delivered.
Name on the back. Wow.
Koeverden, number 1.
Am I number 1?
We had to. That's why I did it. That's why I did it.
But now I've got a 10 goal. This is a long sleeve shirt. I got to be in net. All right. Thank you, guys. It was really good. Really good to see you. Really good to see you again.
Yeah. Cheers. That'll be all, guys, and look forward to more in the future.